You said it is a high stake environment. In those settings, intelligence is not just gathering information, it shapes decisions, public understanding, policy, market, economies, and also people's lives.
In my personal experience, the cost of slow decision making can be life or death. So, I had the choice on the ground whether to move a team of 27 people or to stay put post-attack. And because I didn't have access to the intelligence that I needed, that was out there, by the way, it meant that I had to make a riskier decision that needed to happen.
In many AI tools, speed is the main selling point. But in your space, speed alone is not enough. The output also needs to be trusted.
And I guess automatically when you hear AI, people think hallucination, right? And the tolerance for hallucination in our industry is effectively zero. So a confident wrong answer in intelligence can very much compromise a decision or a person. So everything that we claim is sourced. There will be a clickable link within the platform. So there's never going to be anything in there that you don't know where it's come from, essentially. So the human doesn't disappear. They become sort of an arbiter of the evidence trail, which raises the standard of work, in my opinion, rather than sort of lowering it.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Founder's Instinct. I'm your host Shaheer Khan. A lot of people talk about AI making things faster, but bigger question seems to be, can AI help people make better, more evidence-based decisions in high-pressure environments? In today's conversation, we'll be looking at high-stakes intelligence, responsible AI evidence-based decision-making, and what it takes to build technology for complex environments where accuracy and trust really matters. Our guest today is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Satorus Group, where she's building AI agents for high-stakes intelligence. Her work focuses on helping analysts and decision makers cut through noise, gather evidence, source claims, and make better decisions in real time. It is my great pleasure to welcome Beth Martin-Board. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you for having me.
Beth, I'm looking forward to this conversation because your work is very different from typical AI startup stories. But before we get into that, I think your personal background is important because Satorus seems to come from a lived experience rather than just a market opportunity. So please, can you tell us about your journey and how it led you from intelligence work in post-conflict environments to building Satorus Group?
Yeah, of course. So post-university, I started working as an intelligence analyst. I focused on Middle East, North Africa, and that took me to post-conflict environments. Most recently, it was Iraq. And I sort of learned where analysis has real human consequences. So I spent years sort of watching how intelligence actually gets made. You've got brilliant analysts, painstaking work, and it's constrained by tools built for what was a slower world, I think. So I guess for founding Satorus, the founding insight wasn't exactly like AI is exciting. It was there's a bottleneck in decision making. And that comes mostly from synthesis and not from the fact that there's no data access. So I think it kind of came out of wanting to close the gap between the volume of information available and, actually at the speed of which a human can turn it into defensible answers. And that came from my personal experience. Last time I was on deployment, my team was actually the target of an attack, and all of the tools I had, they aggregated the data, but they didn't actually give me what I needed in the time. So we decided to sort of build a solution to that problem.
That's great. That's a really powerful journey, Beth. Before Satorus, you worked in intelligence in post-conflict environments. And as you said, it is a high-stake environment. In those settings, intelligence is not just gathering information, it shapes decisions, public understanding, policy, market, economies, and also people's lives. And you've described intelligence as slow, manual, and drowning in noise. For someone outside the space, it might be hard to understand how damaging poor or delayed intelligence can be. So what does that look like in practice for organizations making high stakes decisions?
Yeah. I mean, it really obviously depends on sort of what you're working in. In my personal experience, the cost of slow decision making can be life or death. So, I had the choice on the ground whether to move a team of 27 people or to stay put post-attack. And because I didn't have access to the intelligence that I needed, that was out there, by the way, it meant that I had to make a riskier decision than needed to happen. So we kind of wanted to build something that synthesized the data for decision-ready output for circumstances like that, but also it's applicable in many cases, I think. There's so much data online now, and teams don't know what to do with it. There's just too much to sift through, that we've got these brilliant analysts who know exactly what to do with the data, but they're just sifting through noise. And it's not time well spent. The world is moving at such a fast pace. We've got so many conflicts happening at the minute simultaneously. And analysts are just spending time sifting through noisy, messy data sets, when really they should be focusing on actually analyzing that data, putting the points together, synthesizing it into something that's ready for a decision output.
Right. That was my next question. Like, is the problem getting worse because there's too much information available?
Yeah, I think it's definitely getting worse because there's too much. And I think people are somewhat trying to find solutions that doesn't actually quite address the problem. I'm seeing this a lot at the minute. So there's these open source dashboards that are popping up, and they're kind of built by people who think intelligence is cool, and they can kind of see somewhere that there's an issue and they try and address a problem, but without fully understanding that domain and the workflows behind it and having had ground experience, it's not actually really addressing the problems. And a lot of them are just sort of doing the same thing that the past softwares are doing, which is just aggregating the data. And that's not what you need. It's great to have access to the data. It's great to be able to have a software that can pull that data for you.
Well,
But unless it's actually synthesizing and pinpointing and analyzing that and kind of sifting through the irrelevant side of things, for example, planted data is a massive thing. To take up time from analyst teams, actors can plant data that's completely irrelevant or false. And what you're then doing is sifting through all of that data too. So I think, there's no solution. Well, there wasn't before Sidney, but there wasn't really a solution to address that problem of just too much data and taking it a step further beyond just aggregating.
there's too much manual work and little confidence in what is being presented. So that leads us to what Satorus is building. You described Sidney as AI agents that run intelligence investigation process, including source collection, analysis, and synthesis. I'd love for you to explain that in simple terms and how it changes the way intelligence investigations are carried out.
In very simple terms, it
Yeah.
pretty much processes the entire intelligence investigation end to end. So as a human analyst, I would find the data, I would be scouring the dark web for hours, I'd be on Telegram channels, I'd be comparing news feeds with, dark web forum chatter, seeing where there's gaps, who's connected to who. That in itself takes days, if not weeks, if not months, depending on what you're working on. Sidney will do all of that for you and actually analyze the data in your context. So we've built in workflows that cover loads of different sort of intelligence investigations. It will synthesize all of that for you, remove all of the messy, irrelevant data, only bring back what's really important and present it to you in a way that's ready for decision making. So whether that be in report style, presented back as a map, it's editable to sort of what you need as well.
Right. Can you give an example of how an investigation would work before and after Sydney?
Well, I can give you an example of one that I literally ran about 20 minutes ago, which is on the explosions that just happened in Damascus. So I pretty much prompted into Sidney, tell me about the explosions that happened in Damascus, what's being said on the dark web channels, any threat actors I need to be aware of. And it essentially pulled all of, as I just said, pulled all of the data, synthesized it, got rid of the messy data, gave me back what was actually important and what I needed, including the links and the sources. So then I could go away and then talk about or advise or do whatever I needed to do with that data. If I was to do that manually, I'd be probably still doing it right now and having not found much, because you're just sifting through group chats and making sure that these people are who they say they are, and mapping a network and doing all of the little manual things that they're not hard, they just take a lot of time.
Yeah. And that's where this becomes especially important, because in many AI tools, speed is the main selling point. But in your space, speed alone is not enough. The output also needs to be trusted.
Yeah.
The one line that stood out to me from your profile was every claim sourced, nothing asserted beyond the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a very important principle. So my next question is that high stakes intelligence trust is critical. How do you make sure AI generated insights are properly sourced, evidence based, and not making unsupported claims?
Yeah, so everything that we claim is sourced. There will be a clickable link within the platform. So there's never going to be anything in there that you don't know where it's come from, essentially. And we've built a really, really good sort of source vetting process that goes on behind the scenes, which again, it's all displayed within the methodology. I think it's super important in any form of intelligence or analysis to have very critical awareness of where a source comes from and how it's been graded and why it's been graded that way. So that's something we've worked really, really hard on. And so far, I've got really good feedback on as well. I think people like to see the layers behind, any sort of claim. And it's something that some of the other softwares out there don't do. They either don't source things properly or they don't have reliability scores on the sources. So, you might have pulled something back, but it's actually super unreliable, and you don't want to automatically think that that's something that you should weigh more than another source. So that's something that we really, really tried to build in, and I guess is one of our USPs in the sense that it's very thorough. And I think that's super important when it comes to intelligence investigations. And, when it comes to intelligence as well, there has to be a human nuance to it. So at the end of the day, it's ultimately the human that's going to read this and make the decision. So having some understanding or human understanding within context is super important, but that's what Sidney aims to provide. It gives you the evidence with the context, and ultimately it's the human that makes a decision at the end of the day, but Sidney will
Yeah.
get you 90% of the way there, so you're not just doing all of that manual aggregating.
Yeah. And I imagine it also makes building the product much more harder because the stakes are high and the standards are higher than normal productivity or automation tool.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
yeah,
the pressure's on to make sure that, everything's good, but that's really why we spoke to so many people when we first started building. I think the amount of market research we did was insane. And obviously we've been trialing and we've had beta testing, and we've taken all of that feedback and sort of built that into what the product is now. So I think just keeping a continuous feedback loop going and making sure that this is really serving the people that we're aiming for it to serve is super important. And so far it's been really good on our side.
yeah. Okay, Beth, a lot of founders building AI products talk about speed, adoption, user experience, but in your case, the cost of error is much higher.
Mm.
So, what were some of the hardest challenges in building AI agents for a field where mistakes can have serious consequences? And how do you build confidence with users who are naturally cautious of AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are cautious about AI when it comes to intelligence because it has always been such a human and manual job. And I guess automatically when you hear AI, people think hallucination, right? And the
Yeah,
tolerance for hallucination in our industry is effectively zero. So a confident wrong answer in intelligence can very much compromise a decision or a person. So I'm very glad to say we've built against that, and that's not really a problem for us. And I think a lot of that comes from the actual back end and the workflows. So shout out to my engineering team. I can't say too much to that.
yeah,
But I think what plays into it is that the workflows have been built by us, by people who have been in the industry, who know exactly what to do, and the steps are based on human steps. It's not something we've just said, do this and run with it. There's real human methodology behind everything that actually happens within the system. So, getting the agents to know what they don't know is super important, and making sure that that's built properly.
yeah,
And again, going back to the source grading and the provenance, that has to be first class and not something that's just sort of like bolted on. And again, that's an engineering and methodology problem. It's not just a model problem. And I think when you realize that there's actually a massive human input and plan behind the actual system, I think people tend to understand it a little bit more and then start to trust it a little bit better.
yeah. Speaking about trust, this brings up an important point. A lot of people fear that AI will replace analysts or decision makers, but your work seems more about helping them cut through the noise and making stronger decisions. In many industries, the conversation around AI becomes very binary. Either it replaces people or it does not, but the reality is usually much more nuanced. So, how do you think AI changes the role of analysts and decision makers rather than replacing them?
Yeah, I mean, it in our industry, it removes the sort of drudgery behind things. It removes the manual workload that you have to do. So, the collection, the cleaning of the data, the first pass triaging, and it gives analysts their time back to do the important things, which is interpreting the analysis and making the judgment and therefore making the decision. And I think by doing that, you can make quicker decisions, which inevitably speed up operations, make people safer. So we're definitely not replacing an analyst here. We're just making their lives easier. So they somewhat move up the value chain. So just from just doing searches to interrogating the findings and then actually owning the decision rather than just being the person that scours the internet all day. And I think for decision makers, on the other hand, it sort of compresses the distance between the question and like the defensible answer. So they can act
Yeah.
inside a window that actually matters rather than having to outsource and wait for weeks on, a consultancy that's going to take a while to bring things back. So again, it's also about that time. So the human doesn't disappear. They become sort of an arbiter of like the evidence trail, which raises the standard of work, in my opinion, rather than sort of lowering it.
Yeah. And this is more of a general question. You know how fast AI is progressing these days, and it's not going to be like all the positive things in the progression. So, where do you think AI needs to be regulated, and can it be used for like wrong purposes? Like you are
Yes.
doing intelligence to help people, but can it be
Mm.
used for the other purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually quite a big trend at the minute with some extremist groups using AI to fabricate imagery. I think that's a big thing because people believe what you see, not so much what you hear, right? So fabricated images have a huge impact. And I was actually looking into a group of actors who were fabricating imagery in the Middle East to sort of perpetuate a narrative that wasn't true. So there's definitely people who will be using AI for those wrong reasons. And regulation is a huge thing. And I think that's got to come from top down a little bit. But I think just remembering ethics is a massive thing. So in intelligence, ethics is everything. If you don't have the ethics and morals behind it, then you really shouldn't be practicing intelligence. So when it comes to us and using AI within intelligence and analysis and things like that, having an ethic and moral code behind everything and having that sort of written into the steps in which you do things so that there's actually guardrails around what you can do. Somebody can't go onto Sidney and start using it in a negative manner because of the way that we've built it. And I think that's super important.
Looking forward, like fast forwarding 5 years or 10 years, do you think AI will replace even the soldiers and everything? Like AI will be fighting AI?
I think AI will definitely become more useful in a
Yeah.
war zone or battlefield scenario. But no, I don't think that we'll ever get to a point where we are just completely removed from it. I think at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's the humans who control the AI. And I think some people like to think of it as a little bit of like a Hollywood film where it sort of starts becoming its own thing and running in and, taking over the world a little bit. But that's not the case. AI is only what we make it, essentially. And it's only as powerful as we decide. So I think
Exactly.
it's not something that's going to sort of run off and grow legs and start trying to take over everybody. But
Yeah.
I definitely think we'll see a lot more of it. And I think there are some, useful cases in which AI can be used and probably isn't yet. But I know that Starmer's obviously just released the new defense budget, and there's a lot of talk about AI and warfare and things like that in there. So I think it's becoming more of a conversation, and hopefully we will see some improvement, whether in a form that's going to help protect people and help push the country forward and be useful in that sense. But I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be too dramatic of a change.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so Beth, that was a really useful perspective, especially for founders building in serious and in markets where trust is the name of the game. So we are just around the end now. I'd love to bring it back to the founder journey. You're building in a space where credibility and accuracy and trust matter from day one. That's very difficult from building a simple consumer product. So looking back at your journey so far, what advice would you give to founders building AI products in complex industries?
So I would probably say the first and foremost, most important thing is just earning the right to automate. You need to understand the domain deeply enough that practitioners actually recognize that you're solving their problem and you're not imposing just a generic solution, a little bit like the sort of dashboard solutions I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Because I think it's super important that you're building for trust before you build for scale. So in our industry, provenance, auditability, sorry, honesty about uncertainty is the product, and that's not just a glamorous feature. So yeah, talk to people at the actual forefront of it all, at the sharp end of it constantly. I think the real requirements sort of live in those workflows and not the glamorous features and outputs and pitch decks and things. So, just speak to the people who you're actually serving, resist the temptation to overclaim, and make sure you're being super compliant and secure. I think, without that, you've kind of lost the foundation of anything you're building on.
Yeah. Beth, that was some really great advice. This has been an amazing and insightful conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your journey, the thinking behind Satorus, and the challenges of building AI in a space where trust matters so much. And I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Okay, to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Follow the Founder's Instinct for more conversations with founders, CEOs, operators, and what it really takes to build, lead, and scale companies. I'll see you in the next episode.